Denied the skies, she stood her ground, mocked and doubted, but never bound. One mission came, the battle's test. 4 enemy jets laid to rest. From shadows cast to pilot's light, she soared beyond the fiercest fight. A tale of strength, of will, of grace, the woman who claimed her place. If you love stories of courage and triumph, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that inspires. Now, let's dive into Claire's incredible journey. A story of determination, bravery, and breaking barriers. In the small town of Millfield, tucked away between quiet rolling hills and the hum of a nearby airbase, lived a woman named Claire Reynolds. To many, Millfield was just another peaceful town where the biggest news might be a local football game or the annual fall festival. But Claire's world was far from ordinary. She had always dreamed of the skies, of flying fast and free, of protecting her country from threats beyond the horizon. Claire wasn't like most of the other girls in town. She wasn't interested in shopping or gossip. From a young age, she was drawn to stories of courage and strength, especially those of pilots who had faced danger head-on. Her father, a retired Air Force mechanic, had fueled this passion by sharing tales of jets roaring through the clouds and the bravery it took to master them. When Claire turned 18, she enlisted in the Air Force with a singular goal: to become a fighter pilot. It was the hardest path, especially for a woman in a military world still adjusting to change. But Claire's resolve was ironclad. She spent hours in the simulator, studied aerodynamics late into the night, and pushed her body and mind to the limit. At the Air Force Base near Millfield, Claire's determination was clear to some. Her instructors saw her quick reflexes, her sharp thinking under pressure, and her unshakable discipline. But not everyone was convinced. Pilot? Come on, Claire. Some of the men in her squad would snicker behind her back. You're too fragile for this. The whispers grew louder in the mess hall, in the hangars, and even among officers who were supposed to be her mentors. Despite the undercurrents of doubt and even outright mockery, Claire kept moving forward. She ignored the sneers and the sideways glances. Every morning, she laced up her boots and climbed into the cockpit simulator, ready to prove herself. Her chance came during the selection process for the fighter pilot training program. It was a grueling set of tests designed to push candidates to their limits, physically, mentally, emotionally. Claire passed with flying colors, ranking among the top 5. But then the unexpected happened. The final decision was in. Claire was denied the spot. The official reason was vague, something about not fitting the profile or needing more experience. But Claire knew the truth. It was the old biases, the resistance to a woman breaking the mold. The words stung more than any physical injury she had ever endured. She sat alone in her quarters that night, the silence heavier than the aircraft she longed to fly. Her heart ached, but it was not defeated. Somewhere deep inside, a fire burned. Brighter. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The morning after Claire received the devastating news, Millfield seemed unchanged. The same golden sunlight filtered through the maple trees. The distant hum of airplanes continued overhead, and the small-town world moved on without missing a beat. But for Claire Reynolds, everything felt different. She woke up with a tight knot in her chest, a sting of rejection still raw, the weight of others' doubts pressing down harder than ever. Her father, James Reynolds, noticed immediately. Over breakfast, he watched her quietly, then said gently, "Claire, you've got the heart of a warrior. That rejection doesn't define you." She forced a small smile, but couldn't shake the bitter taste of disappointment. "It's not just the spot, Dad. It's what it means that I'm not good enough because I'm a woman. That no matter how hard I work, how well I perform, I'll always be second choice." James sighed, his eyes heavy with sympathy. "You're stronger than they think, and stronger than you think, too." Claire nodded, but inside, her mind raced with questions. How many more times would she have to fight, not just the enemy in the skies, but the enemy within her own ranks? How many more times would she have to prove she belonged? Back on base, the whispers were louder now. Some men openly mocked her, calling her pilot wannabe or glory chaser. Even some officers avoided eye contact or offered cold smiles instead of encouragement. One evening, in the mess hall, Claire overheard a group of senior pilots discussing her. "She's not cut out for the fighter squadron. Too emotional," one said. "Yeah, flying a jet isn't about feelings. It's about guts and grit," another added. Claire's fists clenched, but she held her tongue. She knew losing her temper wouldn't help. Instead, she channeled her frustration into silent determination. Over the next weeks, Claire immersed herself in training more fiercely than ever. She ran extra miles at dawn, studied flight manuals with laser focus, and practiced in simulators until her eyes burned. Every moment was a fight to prove she wasn't just good enough. She was. Exceptional. Her commanding officer, Major Ellis, noticed. A gruff, no-nonsense man, Ellis rarely showed emotion, but one afternoon he pulled Claire aside. "You're working hard," he said gruffly. "But this isn't about hours logged. It's about instincts. You need to trust yourself more." Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm trying, sir." Ellis nodded, just barely. "Keep it up. The skies will test you in ways no simulator can." The days turned into months. Claire's skills sharpened, but the official fighter pilot program remained close to her. Instead, she was assigned to a support role, flying reconnaissance missions, assisting from the ground, always watching others take the flights she dreamed of. One bitter afternoon, a senior officer, Colonel Mason, called Claire into his office. His voice was cold, his eyes hard. "Miss Reynolds, you need to accept that the fighter pilot program isn't for everyone, especially not women." The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. "I'm not asking for special treatment, sir. I'm asking for a chance to prove myself. That's all," she said steadily. Mason sneered. "Your chance came and went." "It's time to be realistic." Claire stood her ground. "I'm not done yet." As she left his office, she felt the full weight of the injustice settle over her like a storm cloud. But beneath that storm was a spark, a promise to herself that she would rewrite the rules. She would rise not despite their doubts, but because of them. That night, sitting alone under the stars just outside the base fence, Claire made a silent vow. She would find a way to break through the walls built around her, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd ever been told no. Because sometimes the fiercest battles aren't fought in the skies. They're fought in the heart. Days blended into weeks, and Claire's routine became a delicate balance of silent endurance and fierce resolve. She carried the sting of rejection like a secret wound, one she hid beneath her uniform and steady gaze. Around Millfield's military base, the familiar sounds of jets taking off and landing only deepened the ache inside her, a constant reminder of the skies she was barred from conquering. But Claire refused to be invisible. In the support squadron, she threw herself into every task, from coordinating flight logistics to analyzing reconnaissance data, proving herself indispensable. Yet, no matter how much she accomplished, she was still a spectator in the arena she longed to enter. One afternoon, after a grueling day assisting on a reconnaissance mission, Claire found herself alone in the base hangar. The sleek fighter jets gleamed under the fluorescent lights, their powerful forms ready for battle. She walked slowly past them, fingertips brushing the cold metal as if to absorb their strength. "Dreaming again, huh?" a voice said softly behind her. Claire turned to see Captain David Harris, a pilot she respected for his skill and quiet confidence. Unlike some others, David never treated her like an outsider. He saw her as a colleague, a fellow soldier. "Yeah," she replied, a tired smile flickering. "Every day." David leaned against a nearby crate. "You've got what it takes." "Claire, I see it." She shook her head. "They don't. Not the people who make the calls." David's face darkened with sympathy. "That's not right. You shouldn't have to fight harder just because of who you are." Claire's eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and frustration. "I don't want their pity. I want their respect. I want a chance." David nodded slowly. "I'm with you. If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden blare of the base sirens. An urgent alert flashed on the control screens. Enemy jets had been detected approaching American airspace. The base scrambled to respond. In the command center, chaos erupted. Pilots rushed to their jets. Technicians worked frantically to prep the runways. Claire's heart pounded as orders came down. Several fighter pilots were to intercept the incoming threat, but the base was stretched thin. Several pilots were unavailable due to injury or previous missions. There weren't enough hands to fly every jet. Claire felt the familiar sinking feeling settle in. Yet something inside her stirred. A deep primal need to act. Major Ellis barked orders. "We need all available pilots. Anyone qualified, step forward." A hush fell over the room. Claire's voice broke through, steady and clear. "I'm qualified." Heads turned sharply. Colonel Mason's eyes narrowed. "Reynolds, you're not authorized for combat missions." "I am trained. I can fly those jets," Claire insisted, her voice unwavering. "I want to protect our country." Ellis looked at her, weighing the risk. The base needed every able pilot. Against protocol, he gave a reluctant nod. "Reynolds, you're up. Get to your jet." Adrenaline surged through Claire's veins as she raced to the runway. The cockpit enveloped her like a second skin. As the engines roared to life, she felt something she hadn't before. A fierce clarity, a sense of purpose sharper than any fear. She soared into the sky, the enemy jets looming ahead like dark shadows on the horizon. The radio crackled with tension as pilots coordinated their attack. Claire's hands moved instinctively, her training guiding every maneuver. Then, one by one, she engaged the enemy. The battle was fierce, a blur of speed and danger. But Claire's skill and determination shone. She outmaneuvered the first jet, her muzzle locking on and striking true. Then another, and another. 4 enemy jets fell under her command that day, a feat no one had expected, least of all the commanders who had once denied her the chance. Back on the ground, as the dust settled and the threat vanished, the base erupted in disbelief and awe. Claire, the pilot they'd underestimated, had saved them all. But for Claire, the victory was bittersweet. She had flown not just to defend her country, but to shatter the barriers that held her back. As she climbed out of her jet, the cold eyes of Colonel Mason met hers. This time there was no sneer, only a reluctant respect. The skies had spoken, and Claire Reynolds had answered. The aftermath of the mission echoed throughout the base and beyond. News traveled fast, carried on radio waves, and whispered in the mess halls. Claire Reynolds, the same woman who had been denied the fighter pilot program, had single-handedly taken down 4 enemy jets in one mission. It was the kind of story that could have been ripped from a movie script. Yet it was painfully real. But reality was complicated. The moment Claire's boots touched the tarmac, she was swarmed by a mix of reactions. Some faces lit up with awe and congratulations. Others were tight-lipped, uncertain what to say. The air was thick with a tension she had never experienced before, a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and resentment. Major Ellis stood nearby. his usual stoic expression softened by pride. "You did well, Reynolds," he said quietly. "Better than well." Claire nodded, but inside, a storm was brewing. The command center was packed with officers debating what to do next. Colonel Mason was at the center, his jaw clenched as he addressed the room. "This was an extraordinary circumstance," Mason said firmly. "Not a precedent." Lieutenant Parker, a younger officer with a fresh perspective, challenged him. "With all due respect, sir, Claire saved lives today. She proved she's more than ready for the fighter program." Mason's eyes flicked. Toward Claire, a lucky day does not a pilot make. Claire clenched her fists but held her ground. "Sir, with respect, I've trained just as hard as any of those pilots. I was ready before this mission." The room fell silent. The unspoken question hung heavy. Was it time for the Air Force to change, or would old biases continue to rule? The days that followed were a whirlwind. The media caught wind of the story, celebrating Claire as a hero. Interviews flooded in, and the public rallied behind her. Letters of support poured into the base, and even some of the most hardened officers began to soften their stance. But inside the walls of the military hierarchy, resistance remained fierce. One afternoon, Claire was called to a closed-door meeting with Colonel Mason and several senior officials. The mood was tense. "We acknowledge your heroism, Reynolds," Mason began, his tone carefully measured. "But the fighter pilot program has standards: physical, psychological, and experiential. You do not meet all of them." Claire's heart pounded. "I've met every requirement. I've logged the hours, passed the tests, and proven myself in combat." Mason's gaze was steely. "This isn't personal. It's protocol." She shook her head, frustration boiling over. "Protocol is what kept me grounded when I was ready to fly. Protocol almost cost lives today." The meeting ended without a clear answer, leaving Claire in a limbo, more frustrating than rejection. But Claire was no longer the same person who had sat quietly in her quarters months before. The mission had changed her, given her a voice that could not be silenced. Back at the base, she found unexpected allies. Captain David Harris became a trusted friend and advocate. Together, they gathered signatures from fellow pilots, technicians, and officers who supported Claire's cause. They wrote letters, presented petitions, and demanded a formal review of the fighter pilot program's policies. Outside the base, the community of Millfield rallied as well. The local newspaper ran a feature titled "Claire Reynolds, Breaking Barriers and Taking Flight." Neighbors, old friends, and even strangers sent messages of encouragement. Amid the growing support, Claire faced personal challenges too. Emotional toll of constant scrutiny weighed on her. Some nights, the doubts crept in. Was she truly cut out for this? Did her fight matter? Yet every time those dark moments threatened to overwhelm her, Claire remembered the faces of the pilots she had saved, the pride in her father's eyes, and the fire that had driven her from the start. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The Air Force announced an official review panel to reconsider Claire's application to the fighter pilot program. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Claire knew the road ahead would still be steep, filled with battles both in the skies and in the halls of power. But she was ready, because sometimes the hardest fight is not the one against the enemy. It's the fight to be seen and heard for who you truly are. And Claire Reynolds was just getting started. The days leading up to the official review panel were some of the most difficult Claire had ever faced. The buzz of anticipation mingled with an undercurrent of anxiety that crept into her every waking moment. She had fought so hard to get this far, yet the outcome was still uncertain. Every conversation, every glance, felt heavy with unspoken judgment. Claire spent hours preparing. She met with her supporters, pilots, instructors, and even civilians from Millfield who believed in her cause. Together, they went over her flight, logs, her training records, and the details of the mission that had turned the tide. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall she was building against discrimination. Her father, James, was her steady rock throughout the process. One evening, as Claire sat poring over documents, he came into the room, carrying a cup of tea. "You're carrying the weight of the world, Claire," he said softly. She looked up, exhausted. "Sometimes it feels like I am." James sat beside her, his eyes kind. "Remember, you're not alone. You've got more strength in you than you know. And you've got people who believe in you." Claire nodded, feeling a spark of hope. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had been told she didn't belong. On the morning of the review panel, Claire arrived early at the military headquarters. The room was cold and sterile, filled with stern faces generals and officers who held her future in their hands. The panel began with questions about her qualifications, her experience, and her performance during the recent mission. Claire answered each question with calm confidence, her voice steady even as her heart raced out. But then the questions shifted, more pointed, more personal. "Miss Reynolds," one officer asked, "do you believe your gender has impacted your performance under stress?" Claire took a deep breath. "I believe my training and preparation have made me capable. My gender does not define my ability to perform under pressure." There was a murmur in the room. Some nodded. Others looked. Unconvinced, another officer leaned forward. "Are you prepared for the challenges of being one of the few women in a combat squadron? The scrutiny, the isolation?" Claire's gaze didn't waver. "I've faced isolation and doubt my whole life. I'm ready for the challenges that come with this role." The panel deliberated for hours. Outside the room, Claire waited, the seconds stretching endlessly. When the decision finally came, the room filled with a heavy silence. Colonel Mason, who had been a vocal skeptic, stood and addressed Claire directly. "After careful review, the panel has decided to admit you to the fighter pilot program." A rush of emotion surged through Claire: relief, pride, and something deeper, a quiet triumph born from years of struggle. But the victory was tempered. The program was rigorous, more demanding than ever. She would have to prove herself again and again, under the watchful eyes of those who doubted her. Back on base, word spread quickly. Some celebrated. Others watched her with renewed skepticism. Claire knew this was only the beginning. The real test lay ahead in the grueling training sessions, the relentless drills, and the constant battle to be accepted not just as a pilot, but as a leader. That night, as she lay in bed, Claire thought about the journey ahead. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the weight of the world threatened to crush her spirit. But she also knew this. She had already flown through storms darker than any enemy jet, and she was ready to soar. Because this time, she wasn't just fighting for a spot in the skies. She was fighting to change the world. The fighter pilot training program was nothing like Claire had ever experienced before. It was relentless. Every day tested her limits, physically, mentally, emotionally. From the moment the alarm blared at dawn to the final debrief late at night, there was no room for error, no space for weakness. Claire threw herself into the program with everything she had. The other trainees were a mix of seasoned men and a few other women, all determined, all fiercely competitive. At first, some of the men kept their distance, skeptical of her abilities. Whispers and sideways glances followed her through the hangars and classrooms, but Claire refused to be intimidated. Each time she pushed herself harder, proving her skill in the simulators, acing the physical tests, and mastering complex maneuvers. The skepticism began to fade. Slowly, respect began to grow. One afternoon during a high-G training exercise, Claire's jet shook violently. The intense pressure threatened to overwhelm her senses, but she held steady, focusing on her breathing and training. When she emerged from the spin, her instructor, Captain Harris, who was now a key supporter, nodded approvingly. "Impressive control under pressure," he said. "You're one of the best in this class." Hearing those words filled Claire with quiet pride. It wasn't just about winning respect. It was about proving to herself that she belonged. But the path was far from smooth. The physical strain left her muscles aching, the long hours sapped her energy, and the emotional toll of constant scrutiny weighed heavily. Some nights she would lie awake, haunted by memories of the rejection she had faced and the fear that it could happen again. There were moments when the older, grimmer voices from the base echoed in her mind, doubting, dismissing, warning her to step back. Yet Claire's determination never faltered. She found strength in small victories, a perfect landing, a well-executed formation flight, a word of encouragement from a fellow pilot. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Claire sat alone on the airfield, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Her thoughts drifted to her father and the small town of Millfield, where her journey had begun. A soft voice broke through her reverie. "You're doing great, you know," said Captain Harris, coming to sit beside her. She smiled tiredly. "It doesn't always feel that way," he shrugged. "The fact you keep going, even when it's tough, that's what makes you great." Claire looked at him, grateful for his friendship and belief. As weeks turned into months, Claire's performance soared. Her name moved from whispered skepticism to respected competence. She led training missions, helped newer recruits, and even earned commendations for her precision and calm under pressure. Still, the real test loomed, the final evaluation flight. That would determine if she could officially join the fighter squadron. The day arrived with a mixture of excitement and dread. Claire climbed into her jet, heart pounding, ready to face the toughest challenge yet. As she took off, the world below seemed to fall away, leaving only the sky and the mission ahead. Every twist, turn, and maneuver was executed with precision, a dance of skill and courage. When she landed, the panel's applause was genuine and heartfelt. Claire Reynolds had earned her wings, but as she stood on the tarmac, looking up at the vast sky she was finally allowed to command, she knew this was more than a personal victory. It was a step toward changing the face of the military forever, because she had fought not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. And now she was ready to lead. Claire's first official combat mission came sooner than anyone expected. The quiet tension at Millfield Air Base had been growing for weeks. Intelligence reports warned of increased enemy activity just across the border, and the fighter squadron was put on high alert. When the call finally came, Claire was ready. The briefing was tense. The mission was dangerous. Intercept enemy aircraft that were trying to breach American airspace. Failure was not an option. As Claire sat in the squadron briefing room, she felt the familiar mix of nerves and determination. Her fellow pilots looked at her with something new, respect. No more whispered doubts, no sideways glances, just quiet trust. Major Ellis, who had once doubted her, now gave a firm nod. "You've earned this. Fly smart, fly strong." Claire climbed into her jet, the cockpit familiar and comforting. As the engines roared to life, she felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. This was what she had trained for, what she had fought so hard to achieve. The mission was intense. Enemy jets approached fast and with deadly intent. Claire moved with precision, coordinating with her squadron, keeping a steady focus even as the battle escalated. Then, the moment came. One of the enemy fighters broke away, attempting a surprise attack on a civilian convoy below. Without hesitation, Claire took the lead. Her hands moved instinctively, guiding her jet into position. The missile launched, cutting through the sky, striking the enemy jet with unerring accuracy. The convoy was safe. Her radio crackled with praise from her. "Great shot, mates. Great shot. Reynolds, you saved lives today." Back on base, the news spread quickly. Claire's success was no longer a surprise. It was expected. She had proven that she was not just capable, but a vital part of the team. But it wasn't just her skill. That changed how people saw her. It was her calm in the chaos, her courage in the face of danger, and her unwavering dedication. One afternoon, as Claire walked through the hangar, a young female pilot approached her. "Miss Reynolds, I just wanted to say, thank you," she said quietly. "You showed me it's possible." Claire smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. Her fight had become someone else's hope. The journey wasn't over, though. Claire knew challenges would continue. Tough missions, lingering biases, and the heavy responsibility of leadership. But now, with every flight, she was breaking barriers and inspiring others. Because sometimes the bravest battles aren't fought in the sky, they're fought in the hearts and minds of those willing to stand tall and refuse to back down. And Claire Reynolds was soaring higher than ever. The months after Claire's first combat mission passed in a blur of flights, training, and briefings. She continued to excel, her reputation growing both within the base and across the military. But more than the medals or commendations, Claire sought something deeper, real change. One crisp autumn morning, the base received urgent orders. A larger enemy offensive was underway, threatening critical infrastructure just a few hundred miles away. The stakes were higher than ever. Claire's squadron was mobilized immediately. This time, she was not just a pilot, she was mission leader. As she briefed her team, her voice was steady, carrying the weight of responsibility. "We've trained for this. Stay sharp, watch each other's backs. We fly as one." The mission was brutal. Enemy jets attacked with fierce determination, and the skies erupted in a deadly dance of missiles and maneuvers. Claire's experience, courage, and leadership shone. In the heat of battle, she coordinated attacks, saved comrades, and destroyed 4 enemy aircraft, a feat no one in the squadron had ever accomplished in a single mission. When they landed, the air was thick with exhaustion and triumph. Base commander, a high-ranking general visiting from headquarters, stepped forward. His eyes met Claire's with a new respect. "Lieutenant Reynolds," he began, his voice steady, "your actions today have set a new standard for excellence. You have not only proven yourself as a pilot and leader, but have paved the way for others to follow." Claire stood tall, feeling the weight of every struggle, every doubt, every moment of perseverance culminate in this acknowledgement. But the recognition didn't stop there. In a historic ceremony held on the base, Claire was promoted, not just as a nod to her achievements, but as a symbol of change. Her name was added to the roster of elite fighter pilots, and a new policy was announced. The fighter pilot program would actively recruit and support women, ensuring opportunities for all who were willing and able. As Claire accepted her promotion, she looked out over the crowd, fellow soldiers, friends, family, and the people of Millfield who had believed in her from the start. Her father's proud smile met hers, a quiet reminder of home and the journey they had shared. That evening, as the sun set over the base, Claire stood beside the runway, watching jets streak across the sky. The horizon was wide and endless, full of possibilities. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges. Biases and obstacles don't disappear overnight. But Claire Reynolds had fought through the storm and earned her place among this best. Her story was no longer just about one woman denied a chance. It was about courage, resilience, and the power to change the world. And as the stars appeared one by one, Claire whispered to herself, and to every soul who had ever been told. They didn't belong. This is just the beginning.